In previous videos, we talked about tips that we have discovered. We went into the Moose River in Mount Robson Provincial Park. We went into Blueberry Pass off the Holmes Forest Service Road just east of McBride, connection point to the Great Divide Trail. And in today's tips, we are going to talk about our multi-day trip into the Kiwa Glacier area. We did a recon in this area in late June of last year. We followed it up with planned a multi-day, but the first attempt to do the multi-day, we headed in there and the water levels for the creek crossings were way too high, way too fast flowing, very dangerous. So these were the smaller creeks, and we were very concerned that even if we found a way through that, crossing the main river would be just absolutely dreadful. So we ended up canceling that one, and then several weeks later we went back into the area. And this trip was a lot of bushwhacking, not really much of a trail, lots of route finding, picking our way through alders that were just crazy, crawling on hands and knees at times, lots of water crossings in this one, in the sense that everything kind of funnels into this river in the middle of the valley, and lots of swamps. And we finally made it to this sort of really neat beach colored area that's been carved out by the glacier. I guess it's melted back and formed into this lake with lots of little icebergs in the lake. Beautiful spot. And we're going to talk about the things that we learned on this multi-day trip into the Kiwa Glacier area. So with that, tip number one. Okay, so the first tip we're going to give is never underestimate water flow changes. What do I mean by that? There's a number of points on this one. Very important one, probably one of the most important things we learned at Kiwa Glacier on this multi-day trip, actually even on our first attempt to get in. So when all the terrain in the area slopes into one single river, there's a lot of places that do that, but if you look on a map, sometimes you'll see, a river branches off to a side valley or something like that. But this particular valley, literally giant steep mountains and everything, all the tributaries, the glacier, any rainfall, it all funnels into this one river. And so it doesn't take much melting or rainfall to really raise the water levels. We looked at the forecast when we went in to this area. Everything should have been okay. I think it was like like a millimeter of rain or something like that, and it just wasn't much. And but in the end, it was not okay. Depth of the water isn't the only factor. Of course, depth is pretty important, but the speed of the water is very important. If it's deep and it's fast flowing, or the temperature of the water is very cold, those factors can make a huge difference. Also, if there's big rocks and boulders on the bottom, uneven, it's going to be pretty tough to brace yourself as you cross. So, we couldn't cross after a light rain had fallen overnight on our third day going back. The rain fell, wasn't even that much. Yeah, it was a thunderstorm, but it was very little rain, and the river rose like a few feet. So the area that we went to go back, and I had it on my track in the software, I knew exactly where we crossed, didn't even look the same. We couldn't even, it was like the river looked like a different place altogether, and we just could not cross there. So we ended up following the river pretty much all the way down for several kilometers down the valley, and just could not find a better place. The further down the valley we went, the worse it got, because more tributaries were flowing into that from the sides of the mountain. The amount of water volume was increasing, and add to that the river was getting steeper as it dropped more steeply down into the valley. So that kind of comes to this point, you really need to have backup plans, for especially when you're considering water crossings, any kind of significant water crossings. Maybe you bring an inflatable dinghy boat, something really lightweight, but enough that a person can get across. Maybe you bring a rope as well, something like that. Maybe like a tire tube with a rope. Alternate routes as well to hike out if you can't cross. Is there another way? And pre-plan these things. Another thing is, do you camp overnight and wait to see if conditions get better in the early morning? Usually in the early morning when things are cooler and whatnot, things can be better. But of course, if the forecast calls for more and more and more rain, things could actually get worse. So we ended up hiking all the way down the valley on the opposite side. We did not cross the river. And at one point it took us 3 to 4 hours just to move 700 meters. It was that bad. It was nighttime. It was dark. We were in really old growth forest with a ton of deadfall, very large trees that we're climbing over. I had researched this side of the valley as a backup plan before we went in there, so I knew what we were getting into. Steep cliffs above, fast flowing, dangerous river below, and in between those two things, chaos, all this deadfall. So pre-discuss with the group of people that you're with. Ask people what their swimming ability is. Discuss any alternate options that the group's able to consider. I thought at one point, I thought maybe I should just swim across this one section. I had a 50-foot rope with me, and I thought I could swim across because I'm a strong swimmer. And I thought maybe I could use that rope and kind of brace it to Gerald, and he could try to come across, and if he slips or falls, I could kind of pull him in, something like that. Maybe I'd brace it to a tree and then just pull him in. But he's not a good swimmer. He really didn't feel comfortable. So never pressure somebody to do something that they're not comfortable doing. Just don't do it. It's not a good idea, especially in situations that are dangerous like this. So anyways, that's point number one. It was a very big lesson for us to learn. And next time we would be better prepared to deal with water flow. So let's move on to point number 2. Okay, so tip number 2, don't camp too close to the brush. Trees, brush, whatever. Obviously, it's always good to have some brush or trees or something to block yourself from the winds and the rain and all that kind of thing. You don't want to be fully exposed out in the open. See other videos about that. But what's really important is when you do kind of get inside that brush area, if you're too close to the brush, it's going to potentially attract animals, mice, bear, things like that, which kind of maybe they're rummaging through the brush and whatever, and it's kind of easier for them to hide in there, maybe the smaller animals, definitely. And it just kind of makes it convenient for them to kind of just come right up into your tent and try to make their way in. Doesn't mean they're going to get in, but it could create some problems. The other thing is when you're right beside that brush, when the wind blows, it'll blow that brush or trees or branches or whatever right against your tent. It'll be noisy, it could damage your tent. In the wintertime, if you're really close to trees or under trees and stuff, that snow could come crashing down on your tent. You want to give yourself a decent amount of distance. Just again, debris could fall down even in the summer if it's not winter, branches and twigs and things like that. You don't want things falling on top of your tent, putting you at risk if you're too close. If you're really close to the brush in the summertime, you're going to block some of that airflow, and it's going to be maybe not as pleasant. The other thing is bugs, things like that, like ticks and mosquitoes and whatever. They all seem to congregate in the brush, especially when it's sunny out or warm. They like to hide in there, and if you're right beside the brush, they're more likely to make their way onto your tent. Maybe they'll find a little hole somewhere. Maybe you didn't zip things up perfectly, and they'll get into the tent a bit more easier. It's what I found. For us concretely, the issue we had was I camped like right beside some brush there. Probably should have picked a little bit of a better area, but it was kind of a nice spot because it was a little dip and I was out of the wind. But in the middle of the night, I heard all the swatting noise on the tent, and it's like, 3 or 4 in the morning, and woke me and Gerald up, and I thought it was maybe a bear. Something was swatting against the tent, and got my bear spray out and whatnot. And then when I turned on my headlamp, I noticed there's a porcupine. It was attacking the side of my tent, swatting the tent. And so, I grabbed my shoes and kind of smacked it, and then eventually it did take off, but I did get a bunch of porcupine needles in the side of my tent, almost punctured my sleep system and all that kind of thing. So just be aware of that. Don't camp too close to the brush, but of course you want to be surrounded by some protective layer from the winds and rain so that you don't get the full brunt of storms and that kind of thing. And also blocks the scent. Well, I don't know how much, but if you're out in the open, it's much easier for all the smells to just kind of blow down the valley. Whereas when you're in the brush, kind of that keeps the smells and stuff from blowing all over the valley. Of course, bears can smell from a long distance, so it's not a foolproof thing, but it's just a tip. So don't camp too close to the brush. Moving on to tip number 3. Okay, so tip number 3 is, when practical, do a recon or reconnaissance for a new area that you're going to backpack in. So this tip is pretty important. We use this pretty much on every multi-day trip that we went into. You need to understand things like the changes in water levels in that area over time, if possible. Like if you go in on a recon and you kind of see it, okay, this is what the river looks like, this is what the side creeks look like, the tributaries is what the swamp looks like, and then you come back another time and you see the levels very different. It kind of tells you something about the time of year that's better, the time of day that's better, early, late, whatever, all that kind of thing. The animal sign, if you see lots of big bear sign on the trail, or you don't, those things are going to tell you something. Are tons of bugs out right now? What kind of bugs are they? Should you be prepared for that? Sometimes just even seeing the terrain in person can be very different than looking at those topographical maps. Sometimes you'll see like rock bluffs and very thick brush, or like lots of deadfall from an avalanche, or giant old growth trees that are all crashed down. That's all going to make a big difference in terms of what you are going to expect on that multi-day trip. And a recon helps you to kind of see things that you're not going to see any other way. You might see new landslides that you're not going to see from like a satellite view or a topographic map. Could be lots of rocks have slid, or maybe there's a flood zone that's changed the landscape, or avalanche carnage, I call it. Lots of trees been swept down the mountainside, and now you've got several kilometers of giant logs you have to cross over, and I've been in such a situation before. And maybe the river where you plan to cross, maybe it's from flooding, and just over time it's rerouted completely different from anything you see on the map. So these are all pretty important things to help you plan for a successful trip. Sometimes seeing the area helps for better planning. You can pick campsites that are close to water. You don't always see water sources on a map, especially if they're smaller and whatnot. Or maybe you see a water source and it's completely dried up in real life. You can pick places that you can see are protected from the wind. You can understand the level of bushwhacking you're going to have to deal with. We did have a pretty good idea when we went to Kiwa. Like, there's these terrible willows, and it goes on for several hours, and we're going to push through it. Good to kind of have that heads up knowledge, because then you're going to maybe change the gear that you bring. And water crossing expectations as well. These are all, very important things. You get kind of a general vibe of the area when you do a recon. Helps you kind of mentally prepare for the environment that you are going to be heading into. So for us, we did a recon with a drone in June of last year, when we were going to check out this area. It was the first time we went in there, and we did our first attempt after that recon on a different day. We planned like a multi-day trip, tried to go in there, it didn't work out, and then finally on our third attempt was the time where we had success. But over all three of those times we actually went in, we got to see vast changes in water levels. different animals. Like sometimes there's fresh, really big bear sign, which we wouldn't have seen if we only went once. Another time we saw a bunch of cattle there, so that told us something. Okay, there's some farmers that are free ranging their animals here, so there are some people out in this area. It's not completely no one around. Sometimes there's farmers there. The river flow rate changes, we got to see that, and it gave us kind of a pre-warning that the area would be a big challenge for crossing the main river. We did see, like, a lot of the tributaries. Again, the first time we tried to go in, we just couldn't cross even a tributary. It was flowing so deep and fast. And that led us to the research that we did, looking for alternatives to find, okay, if we can't cross the river for some reason, like if we can get through on the way in, but we can't come out on the way back, I looked, can we just hike out on this one side? And I knew, okay, it looks possible. It's going to be pretty dreadful. There's cliffs higher up. It's really steep down low, and the river looks like it's raging and really steep. So you kind of need to go in between those two things, and it looks pretty foresty and rough and whatnot. So it kind of gave us a heads up. And in the end, that's what we had to end up using. So when practical, do a recon. Gives you that heads up idea of what you're going to get into, and it can help make the difference between a successful trip and a tragedy or terrible time. Okay, so let's get into tip number 4. Okay, so tip number 4 is be prepared to stop and camp unexpectedly. Lots of times where this is a good idea. This is a kind of decision that you need to make when it's too dangerous to continue. Just remember, hope is not a strategy. We've all heard that quote before. You can't hope that things are going to get better or good. Oftentimes they can get a lot worse. Make sure that you have the gear to be able to set up quickly, set up camp, get to sleep, maybe make a fire, and those are important, critical things that you need to have the equipment for to be able to do, and test that gear at home. Test maybe you have a e-bivvy, it's like an emergency bivvy, where you can crawl into that as a makeshift tent. Make sure your sleeping gear, everything, all that stuff, you know how it works, you know what conditions it'll work in, and then when you need to use it, you're not trying to figure it all out. You've tested it and whatnot. Another thing is, in terms of why you might have to stop and camp unexpectedly, maybe you're overexerted. You're getting close to that point where maybe you're partially injured, or you just know you're going to get injured. Your ankles are sore, your legs are starting to fail. There's a lot of brush. The weather maybe has become very dangerous, windy, or lots of rain and lots of wind. The water levels may have gotten a lot higher than you expected, and the only way out is you have to cross, and maybe daylight is quickly disappearing. It's starting to get dark out, and you still have a lot of bushwhacking to do. Very easy to get injured in those conditions. More likely that you'll run into predators at nighttime, or definitely like lose gear. You'll fall out of your pack or whatnot, or out of pockets or off your head or whatnot, and it's just not a good situation. The other thing is, if the terrain is getting just too dangerous for the conditions, like maybe you get cliffed out somewhere, you didn't expect it, and suddenly there's cliffs there, and it's a long way to get around that. There's no time to get to the next checkpoint that you expected to get to. Maybe dangerously longer than expected. Maybe that's the time to just find a spot, backtrack a bit, find a flat spot as possible, and just set up your sleep. May not be the best sleep, but at least you'll be safe, and in the morning you'll be able to see better, you'll have a bit more energy, and conditions could improve. For us, for this one, being prepared to stop and camp unexpectedly, we're completely exhausted when we had to hike out on the side of the river that we didn't expect to, when we couldn't cross. We contemplated at one point, we did find a flat area, thought about using our e-bivvies. We were about 400 meters from the truck. It was dark out. We were completely out of energy, climbing over giant trees and whatnot. It was pitch dark. We were fully exhausted. Gerald stepped on a bee's nest in the middle of the night. He got stung several times. We should have camped in that flat spot. But in the end, we talked to Gerald, and he just said, well, let's just go. We're so close. But it was probably a good idea at that point to stop and just set up our bivvies. We got very lucky that we made it out safely, and you just don't want to put yourself in that situation. So be prepared to stop and camp unexpectedly. That's point number 4, and the last point, number 5. And finally, tip number 5, protect your vehicle. Know the dangers in your area. So what do I mean about that? A number of places we've been to, there's animals that can chew into your brake lines. It can chew on the rubber, all kinds of parts of your car, making it incapacitated and unsafe to drive. Porcupines are famous for doing that. They chew on brake lines and things like that. And there's animals that can get into your critical parts of your vehicle and mess it up. And actually, some trailheads in the McBride, BC area actually have chicken wire in the parking lot, wrapping the entire parking lot. Things like where you park the vehicle, will the water levels maybe rise while you're out, and maybe flood your vehicle. The bridges that you're crossing, are they really safe to be crossing? Is it possible they could get washed out? Are there thieves in the area? Is it a known issue? Can you have maybe mice get into your engine bay and start chewing up different wires and whatnot? Lots of things to think about. In the Kakwa area, some years ago, there were some hunters. They parked sort of on a creek bed that was all dried up and went on a boat ride somewhere, and they parked their vehicles on that sandbar. And when they came back, the McGregor River rose so much that their vehicles were completely underwater. So you got to know the area. You got to protect that vehicle. Make sure you're putting it in a place that's safe. Make sure that you're putting it in condition that's safe. Porcupines are all over the place in the Robson Valley. Kakwa, the name itself is a native indigenous name that means porcupine. We've seen porcupine in Kakwa. We've seen them in Kiwa. Seen them on Boulder Mountain, all kinds of places like that. So just something to think about. Make sure you bring a spare tire as well. Obviously, it should be a no-brainer. Going in the backcountry, bring equipment like air compressor, spare tire, battery repair kit, maybe a battery boost device. Those are pretty easy to get a hold of these days. Things that you can do basic repairs in the backcountry in case of unexpected problems. We've had numerous flat tires on our trips, and thankfully we had what we needed to patch that up and get home. We protect our vehicle with chicken wire, as most other people in the Robson Valley area do as well, especially for overnight parking. This became another worry for me on our way out from Kiwa, because there's lots of other things in that area. It was our first time kind of doing a multi-day trip there, and I had forgotten to bring chicken wire. Even though I should have known the area is known for porcupine. Remember, in one of the other points I talked about how I was actually attacked by a porcupine at night. And that really made me think on the way out, oh boy, I forgot to bring chicken wire. Wouldn't that be terrible if we got back there and they messed up the brake lines or something like that, and then it's difficult to get home. So just remember, protect your vehicle, know what the dangers are, and be prepared to deal with those. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed these 5 tips. If you did enjoy that, please click the like button and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. And if you have any other tips to share that these made you think about, please leave those in the comments, and I will catch you on the next one. Thanks.
This is no ordinary love. Take my hand, I'm holding every word.
Don't let the day-to-day swallow you